We've been messing with nature for centuries, crossbreeding animals, splicing genes, cloning things we probably shouldn't, and calling it progress. Some of it is genius. Some of it is totally weird. From a sheep that was cloned in a lab to glow-in-the-dark bunnies born with jellyfish DNA, here are 15 human-altered creatures you won't believe exist. And trust us, really won't. Let's start off with number quince, Cuban crocodile hybridization. The Cuban crocodile should have been a conservation success story, rare, powerful, and critically endangered, yet holding on in the swamps of Cuba. But survival isn't just about numbers. In their shrinking habitats, these crocodiles have begun crossbreeding with the more widespread American crocodile. What might seem like nature adapting is actually the slow erasure of an entire species' genetic identity. Cuban crocs are faster, more aggressive, and strikingly patterned. Their cousins, the American crocs, are larger but less territorial. Together, they're producing hybrids that look neither here nor there. The Zapata Swamp, once a sanctuary, has become a genetic crossroads, where only around 3,000 pure Cuban crocodiles remain. Conservationists now face a bizarre dilemma: protect the hybrids or prioritize the purity of a vanishing species. Crossbreeding in the wild doesn't always mean evolution. Sometimes it's a warning sign. When two species blur into one, it's not always a miracle of adaptation. Sometimes it's just another chapter in how humanity rewrites ecosystems without meaning to. Number 14. Toyer. There's a deep line between admiration and obsession, and sometimes that line is stitched into the fur of a house cat. The Toyer wasn't born in the wild or sculpted by Mother Nature. It was manufactured to mimic a tiger. Designer cats aren't new, but the Toyer's creation was unusually intentional. Judy Sudgen didn't want just another exotic-looking feline. She wanted a walking billboard for conservation. Through selective breeding starting in the early 2000s, she crafted a domestic cat with wide, bold stripes and a long, muscular body that echoes the wild tiger's silhouette. But this wasn't about taming the wild, it was about giving the wild a PR campaign. The irony? Toyers are some of the friendliest house cats you'll ever meet. They curl up on laps, purr for scratches, and never know the weight of what their fur represents. Critics argue it commodifies endangered beauty. Supporters see it as a clever way to make people care. In either case, it's proof that even cats can carry a message. But let's be real, does doing this is okay? Number 13. Cama. The cama was never nature's idea. It was an invention born in a Dubai lab in 1998 through artificial insemination. Scientists wanted to fuse the size and stamina of a camel with the gentler personality and wool-producing traits of a llama. Camels have brute strength, but they're aggressive and temperamental. Llamas are easier to handle but lack the raw endurance. The result? A humpless hybrid with long legs, odd proportions, and a stubborn attitude. Some camas turned out friendlier, others inherited their camel parents' mood swings, but the goal wasn't to make a pet. It was to create a useful pack animal for harsh desert climates. Despite early optimism, the project didn't revolutionize transport or farming as planned. Camas remained experimental, rarely bred, and mostly confined to research facilities. They're a living reminder that even with science, not every crossbreed leads to success. When you force evolution's hand, you might get an animal that works on paper, but resists the world it's meant for. Number 12. Dolly the sheep. Dolly wasn't the first clone, but she was the first that made the world stop and stare. Born in 1996 at the Roslin Institute in Scotland, she was cloned from the mammary gland cell of an adult sheep using somatic cell nuclear transfer. What made Dolly historic wasn't just the science, it was what she represented, a living, breathing challenge to everything we thought was final in biology. A sheep made from another sheep, not born but copied. The global reaction was split. Some saw it as a miracle, others saw it as a warning. Cloning instantly shifted from fiction to the future. But Dolly's life wasn't without consequences. She developed arthritis at a young age and died in 2003 from lung disease, raising real questions about the long-term health of cloned animals. Even so, her DNA sparked an avalanche of genetic research, much of which continues to shape bioethics, medicine, and agricultural science. Dolly became more than an animal. She became a blueprint, both awe-inspiring and unsettling. What do you think of it? Number 11. Pyrenean ibex clone. The Pyrenean ibex, once native to the highlands between Spain and France, was already living on borrowed time by the Middle Ages. Overhunting, environmental loss, and the rise of civilization pushed it to the edge until the last known female, Celia, was found dead beneath a fallen tree in 2000. It was the final nail in the species' coffin until science stepped in with one final gamble. Using preserved cells from Celia, researchers attempted to clone the extinct species by implanting the DNA into a domestic goat's egg. The embryo was carried to term and delivered successfully. For 7 surreal minutes, a Pyrenean ibex walked the earth again. Then it died, its lungs unable to function properly. 7 minutes. That's how long it took to go from extinction to resurrection and right back again. It wasn't just a scientific footnote, it was the world's first de-extinction, a brief moment where time bent, and biology tried to undo what centuries of history had already decided. Number 10. Beefalo. Well, yup, that's a real word. This thing was born out of an American obsession with efficiency. Ranchers in the 20th century wanted meat that was lean like bison but docile like cows. So they did what humans do best, forced a mashup. The result? An animal that looks like a cow had a wild weekend in Yellowstone and never quite got over it. The early hybrids were unpredictable, often aggressive, and struggled with basic breeding stability. It took decades to breed out the chaos and get something manageable. Today's beefalo are about 60% cow and 40% bison, carefully balanced like a culinary Frankenstein. While they are efficient meat producers and can thrive in harsher environments, their existence remains an awkward symbol of how far we'll go to manipulate genetics for gain. It's not about survival or natural adaptation, it's about economics. And while the beefalo stands calmly chewing cud on some quiet ranch, its DNA still echoes a violent clash between domestication and wildness. Well, from now on, we won't eat meat. Number 9. Belgian blue super cow. If a cow could win a bodybuilding competition, this would take every medal. These huge cows look less like livestock and more like walking muscle sculptures. Thick shoulders, rippling backs, and thighs that don't quit. The breed didn't happen by accident. It was the result of 19th century farmers in Belgium selectively breeding native cattle with short horns, generation after generation, picking only the biggest and most muscular to reproduce. What followed was a genetic anomaly known as double muscling, caused by a mutation in the myostatin gene. The result? Cows with absurd amounts of lean meat but also serious health issues. Many can't give birth naturally due to the sheer size of their calves. They require constant human intervention to survive, from birth to butchering. It's a powerful example of what happens when agriculture pushes biology to the brink, where strength comes at a cost, and success is measured in pounds, not welfare. Impressive, yes, but also unnerving once you realize how engineered their entire existence really is. Number 8. Indian African hybrid lions. In the 1980s, India's zoos had a bold idea: boost their dwindling Asiatic lion population by crossbreeding with African lions. At first glance, it sounded promising. Lions are lions, right? But the reality was far messier. 2 rescued African lions, former circus performers, were introduced to 2 Asiatic counterparts, and the offspring were anything but healthy. Cubs were born with weak hind legs and spinal deformities and struggled to walk. Their conditions worsened with age. Still, the program continued, producing over 70 hybrid lions by the year 2000. Eventually, the project was shut down, but not before irreversible damage had been done. All the male hybrids were sterilized to stop the bloodline from continuing, and the surviving lions were left to live out their days in captivity. What began as a conservation experiment quickly turned into a quiet tragedy. These weren't lions bred for the wild. They were genetic orphans, stuck between two species and suffering for a plan that tried to play savior but missed the mark entirely. Number 7. The Great Auk. The great auk once ruled the icy waters of the North Atlantic, waddling on rocky shores and diving with precision beneath the waves. Flightless and curious, it grew to nearly 30 inches long, using stubby wings for swimming, not air. Unfortunately, it didn't evolve to survive 16th century European fishermen. Hunted for food, feathers, and oil, the bird vanished quickly, with the last known pair killed in 1844 on a remote Icelandic island. What's left are bones, pickled organs, and the stubborn hope of scientists determined to bring it back. Using DNA extracted from preserved specimens, researchers now aim to edit the genome of the razorbill, a closely related seabird, and recreate the great auk through genetic substitution. It's a long shot, and it blurs the line between conservation and invention. But if successful, it could mean a strange second life for a bird that should have never disappeared in the first place. It's not about reversing extinction, it's about confronting it, face to face, and asking if we've learned anything at all. Number 6. Wolfin. It's not a joke, and it's not a Photoshop prank. Yes, a false killer whale and a bottlenose dolphin really did team up to create a creature that feels like a marine glitch. Called the wolfin, it carries the intense energy of both parents, the sharp brain of a dolphin and the powerful build of a whale. These aren't common accidents either. Wolfin births are so rare that the few known cases have been treated like VIP events in marine biology. One wolfin, Kekaimalu, born at Sea Life Park in Hawaii in 1985, lived a long, monitored life that left researchers fascinated and a little disturbed. The animal wasn't sterile, which surprised scientists who assumed cross-species fertility would stop there. She even gave birth to calves of her own. That opens a can of bioethical questions nobody's fully ready for. If marine parks continue allowing these hybrids to exist, are we casually rewriting the limits of marine evolution, or just too eager to blur species lines for spectacle? Number 5. The piranha woodpecker myth. Buried in the mist of medieval folklore and misunderstood records sits the tale of the so-called piranha woodpecker, or more accurately, the Pyrenean woodpecker, a species native to the borderlands between Spain and France. It wasn't just rare, it was ancient, hunted into obscurity by knights and soldiers who carved through the forests, as if nothing sacred ever lived there. By 2000, the last known female, named Celia, was already the end of her lineage. A falling tree killed her, almost poetically, one final blow from the habitat that could no longer protect her. But in 2009, scientists gave her species one last breath. Using her DNA, they cloned her and implanted the embryo into a domestic goat. The clone was born alive. For exactly 7 minutes, the Pyrenean woodpecker returned. Then it died from lung failure, too unstable to survive. Those 7 minutes weren't a miracle. They were a mirror, a reflection of just how far we're willing to go to fix what we broke, even if all we get in return is silence. Number 4. Tasmanian Tiger Revival Project. AKA thylacine, it wasn't a tiger at all, just a striped, dog-sized marsupial with a jaw that opened far too wide for comfort. Once native to Australia and Tasmania, the last known thylacine died in captivity in the 1930s. Hunting, habitat destruction, and disease sealed their fate. But the story didn't end there. In recent years, scientists have revived efforts to bring thylacine back, thanks to preserved genetic samples and a wave of de-extinction funding. The University of Melbourne now leads the charge, backed by a multi-million-dollar grant to build a dedicated research lab. The plan? Use gene editing and surrogate species, possibly mice or other marsupials, to reassemble a living thylacine genome. It's part science, part resurrection fantasy. They're still missing pieces of the genetic puzzle, but optimism remains. Reviving the thylacine isn't just about nostalgia. It's about repairing what we broke, testing the limits of cloning, and maybe, just maybe, restoring a ghost to the wild that humans wiped out less than a century ago. Number 3. Chimpanzee hybrid. Back in the 1920s, Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanov went down a road science had no business exploring. His goal? Create a human-chimp hybrid. Using artificial insemination, he tried to fuse human DNA with that of female chimpanzees. Nothing came of it, but the very idea raised ethical alarms that still echo today. Then, in the 1970s, a chimpanzee named Oliver sparked new rumors. He stood upright, walked like a man, and carried himself with eerie familiarity. People started whispering, was he part human? A scientific oddity? The answer was simpler. No, he was just an unusual chimp with a strange gait and a history in traveling shows. Oliver wasn't the missing link, but the fact that people believed he might be says a lot. We've always seen reflections of ourselves in apes, and when we start tampering with that mirror through genetics, things get uncomfortable fast. The so-called Human Z projects didn't produce monsters, but they exposed just how far some scientists were willing to go to test nature's boundaries. Number 2. Killer bees. In 1956, a Brazilian scientist named Warwick Kerr had one goal: to boost honey production. So he crossbred European honeybees with African bees, assuming the mix would yield more productive, climate-tolerant bees. Instead, he created a ticking biological problem. These hybrids, now infamously known as killer bees, escaped containment and spread rapidly throughout South and Central America, eventually reaching the US by the 90s. What made them dangerous wasn't just their aggression but their persistence. They swarmed in massive numbers, pursued threats over long distances, and attacked with a level of coordination rarely seen in bee colonies. Their stings weren't deadlier than regular bees, but the sheer volume made them a serious hazard. Multiple deaths and livestock losses followed. It wasn't the science that failed, it was the containment. A well-intended experiment spiraled into a continent-wide invasion. What began as a hopeful tweak to pollination strategy turned into a sobering example of how quickly nature retaliates when humans tinker with its balance and forget the exit plan. Number 1. Roller bear. Somewhere in the icy mess of climate change, nature did its own version of a science experiment. Polar bears started roaming south while grizzlies pushed north, and eventually they met. What followed wasn't a fight, but a fusion. The roller bear, with fur that's both snow and soil, these hybrids carry a little of each parent's DNA and none of the clear identity. First spotted in 2006 in the Canadian Arctic, roller bears now appear more frequently as habitats overlap. They're tougher than polar bears, more adaptable than grizzlies, but biologically confused. Scientists worry these hybrids might slowly blur the line between both species until neither remains pure. What began as a freak encounter in the wilderness has now turned into a subtle genetic invasion, one that speaks volumes about how far climate change can stretch the rules of evolution. These bears weren't made in labs, but they're a direct byproduct of human disruption, and that fact alone makes their existence deeply unsettling. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon.